Aloha, y'all. Daniel Aaron with you. And I am so excited for today. What is today? Today is book reading day. And it reminds me of when I used to read books to children. Worked for many years doing that. I had the great, amazing blessing of reading to my daughter into she was 14 by the time she kind of stopped being interested in that. We used to read every night. But hey, this is not exactly like that. Kind of, though, a little bit like that. I get to read to you. And I am reading to you from my book, The Art of Spiritual Leadership 40 Laws to Transform Your Life and the World. As well, I am happy to respond to questions, comments. I have been and will continue to sprinkle in little bits of information about different aspects of the book, stories behind the scenes, why I wrote certain parts. So I will do that. This is different than, of course, you can get the book in all kinds of formats: hardcover, soft cover, Kindle version, electronic version, or on Audible, and I read the book on Audible. This is a little bit different than that, though, because on Audible, it's very much straight up reading, nearly word for word. A little bit of a performance, but here it's casual. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to type them in, whether that's live or by replay, and I will be happy to respond. So we are up to, where are we up to? We have read the introduction. Yes, we completed the introduction. So that brings us to chapter 1. And hey, the designers did such a great job. If you can, I encourage you to get the softer hardcover one, right? Because you don't really see those kind of things like that in the Kindle version. In any case, whatever version you get, I'm grateful for that. I hope this is useful and fun. Chapter 1, Braveheart, Waterways, and Facing Fear. And by the way, I'm not going to say right now why we've got this motif of the hot air balloon and the world. However, and if you would like to cast your vote for why in here, I would be happy to receive that. Okay, Braveheart, Waterways, and Facing Fear. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Nelson Mandela, whom we spoke about in the introduction. The room is full of the usual noises: silverware clanking, voices mixing, laughter popping through. It's lunchtime, and a full wave of sunlight stands like a sheet opposite where my feet are planted on this linoleum-floored box of a dining room. My breathing must be labored, panicky, and yet I don't notice. I'm focused on playing my role, on saying what I must, on showing up. I want to get it over with as fast as possible, yet I'm also driven to perform my part well. An unconscious dilemma. I've painted half of my face blue. An old red and green checkered tablecloth has become my kilt, and I'm shirtless. I hold a 6-foot piece of PVC pipe in my hand. Now I bang it on the floor. A few people who stand frozen in the entrance have looked at me, yet not enough of them have noticed. Getting their attention, part of it. 2 more loud raps on the floor with my staff turn most of the faces in the room toward me. I am Braveheart. I've come to dine with you, and freedom is what tastes best. I pound my free hand across my chest and look up dramatically at the bank of windows over the diners' heads. Shouts go up. Someone says, "Welcome, Braveheart," in the same cave dweller tone I've adopted. My heart is thumping inside my bare chest, less from the eyes fixed on me than from my inner eyes, the paranoid gaze that has always been part of my world. Seeing my own belly as if it as if from somewhere outside myself. Worse than the angst eating me is the knowledge that I chose and paid for this experience. Mercifully, Annie, who is by my side, takes the focus off me by informing the lunch guests that she is a cat. She meows and says something else, though I do not hear it. It's 1999, and the venue is a radical therapy and recovery center in Holland called Humaniversity. I'm up to my neck in the personal and spiritual transformation experiment of my life. I can't tell you what a victory that short Braveheart performance was for me. In part, because in that heart pounding moment of belly exposure, it hadn't become one yet. Even costumed, the grumpiness I wore was apparent, as were the changes that were happening in me, regardless of my resistance. In fact, it'd be several more days before my grumbling about the role I'd been assigned and about the whole program turned into a smile. That said, you will come to understand it, and more importantly, what it means for you. Lao Tzu, author of the Tao Te Ching, said, "The truth cannot be said. If it is said, it is not the truth." While the truth cannot be stated, we do have the capacity to hear it, to apprehend it. We upon the earth are here to point, to gesture, to pound our staffs, and to raise our voices in laughter. There is nothing I can tell you that you don't already know. It's my greatest hope that the words and stories you find here awaken the realization in you of who you truly are, of what you've always known and felt most deeply, and that with each turning page, you come to know that truth in your belly and in your heart of hearts. A few days after leading my first yoga teacher training course, my assistant Rebecca and I read the feedback we'd collected. Lucas, an unlikely yogi from Austria, had written, "This is not an ordinary yoga teacher training, but rather a way of realizing that you are amazing." He had more to say about learning the physical practice of yoga and our teaching methods, but what stuck with me were those lines. Lucas had just given us our very first spiritual leadership axiom. I emphasize those words, they're in italics, because we will uncover 40 such lessons during our journey together. You know them already, as they are part of our divine coding. The stories in this book will serve to illustrate those axioms. As I elucidate these laws and you take them in, your innate wisdom will help you implement the truths they contain. I'll also give you opportunities to put that learning into action. By the way, on the cover, I said 40 laws because I wasn't sure if enough people would understand the word axiom or not. Bit of an odd word, right? Do people know that word axiom? Spiritual leadership axiom 1. You are amazing. If I tell you that you are amazing, it may sound like flattery, trite, a platitude. If you tell someone with anorexia that they are thin enough, they just can't hear it. If I do my job well, though, we will uncover your amazingness and you'll realize it for yourself. If this were a scholarly article or a thesis, I would set out to prove to you, in no uncertain terms, that you are indeed amazing. The thing is, I can't prove it. No one can prove it. I often told trainees, okay, now that you're here, lured by the idea of being a yoga teacher, know that what this training is really about is you becoming a cultural superhero, a leader. The point of all our work is for you to fall in love with yourself. In those trainings, leadership cultivation always started within the individual. After all, you must lead yourself first and foremost. This book will follow a similar trajectory. We begin with you and naturally evolve into the realm of your influence on others. If you put a frog into a pot of hot water, it'll immediately jump out. If the water is room temperature and you slowly increase the temperature, what will happen? Yes, everyone knows the frog will slowly die instead of jumping out. It's cliche, true, yet also valid as a metaphor for our own lives. Let me show you what I mean. Take a moment right now to feel inside yourself and consider some dreams or goals that you have given up on, especially the big ones from your youth. Contemplate this without self judgment, acknowledging we've all renounced some of our fantasies or aims. What did you once aspire to that you no longer think you have a reasonable possibility of accomplishing? Let's go further. In your life right now, what are some things you've grown accustomed to that you are tolerating? This question also takes just a few moments of consideration, and usually we'll find 3 to 5 such things right away. A light bulb that needs to be replaced, a lawn that needs mowing, a hole in a sock that needs mending, a pile of papers on the desk. Sometimes they are more significant. A ruptured relationship with somebody we love, a leaking roof, a lack of exercise, and a steadily increasing sense of lethargy. We have all grown accustomed to things being the way they are. And one coping mechanism for what we don't feel good about in our lives is to numb ourselves to them. Remember, do not let yourself slip into self judgment here. It's so easy to do. Yet doing so would be to deny the very first spiritual leadership axiom. It's also no fun and not at all helpful. Instead, you can adopt a gentle, curious, and playful attitude toward the truths about yourself that you'll discover while listening to this book. Believe nothing, yet entertain possibilities. Take everything I say as a hypothesis, then act as if it's true. Give yourself the experience of testing the hypothesis. Only then decide if it's useful. If it's not, discard it. I won't be offended. If you only gain 1 or 2 valuable insights from this book, even if the rest doesn't resonate for you, that's perfect. It'll have been a success, enough to change your life in meaningful and positive ways. On the flip side, if you believe me indiscriminately, without feeling into it on your own, the book will have been of little benefit to you. Spiritual leadership axiom 2: experiential learning is true learning. Now, before I go on to the next section, which is a very cool section, go back to something I said earlier. I was quoting myself from 20 years ago, and I said, "The point of all of our work is for you to fall in love with yourself." And when I said that 20 years ago, I meant it, I believed it, and I feel now like I knew just the tiniest bit about that. In the last few years for myself, good golly, the amount of learning I've had around compassionate self forgiveness, around learning to love myself on a much deeper level. Like I understood certain aspects of that in my head, yet had not integrated it into my heart and experience. And lest I get distracted, I could say a lot about that and do in other places. If that's something you would like to talk about or want more information about, drop a comment and we can set up a way to chat, or I can get you some info. For now, though, we go on to the next section. I once lived in Galicia, in the northwest of Spain, in an area known for its rainy weather and a historic cathedral that is the destination point of one of the world's most prominent Christian pilgrimages. El Camino de Santiago is a route that's been traveled by many, Christian or not, in search of healing, wisdom, or redemption. I was lucky enough to live in a centuries-old stone apartment just down the street from the cathedral itself. There's a legend in Santiago about one of Spain's early kings who placed a high value on spirituality, and not just from the Christian tradition. As he was broad minded and wise, he called together the holiest and most enlightened teachers and scholars in his realm and told them that he wanted them to confer and write down the highest wisdom for all the ages. Of course, they were honored, and they were also obliged to obey their ruler. So, To carry out what he had commanded, all of them together went to a remote hermitage where, for 9 months, they debated, discussed, and wrote. They returned to the king and proudly presented him with a 12-volume set of books, which, they said, contained all of the most profound wisdom from all around the world. The king was pleased, both with himself for coming up with the project and the scholars for their work. His praise was short-lived, however. He quickly proclaimed that although he was sure they'd made an exhaustive inquiry and that clearly much work had gone into the writing, it was simply too long. "No one will read it," he said. The king bade them return to the hermitage and edit it down. Again, they graciously thanked their king and set off. However, the grumblings soon began as they were out of his earshot. "Would have been nice to know how long he wanted it to be 9 months ago," said one. Again, they had little recourse since they were under their sovereign's command. After another 3 months of intense effort, they reduced 12 volumes to one. Sadly, when they made the return trip to Madrid, the king's praise was even briefer. He quickly came to the same conclusion as before. "It's too long. No one will read it." This time, the teachers and scholars stayed within the king's castle walls since they felt confident it wouldn't take too long to further condense the great work. Indeed, after a month's labor, they returned to the king and handed him something the size of what we'd call a booklet today. To their dismay and frustration, the king repeated, "It's too long. No one will read it." Barely able to restrain their annoyance with the king, and yet knowing their lives were always in his hands, they set to work once more. At last, when their story, and this account of it, seemed like it would never end, they earned the king's approval and recognition as having reduced the most significant wisdom of all the ages into just one sentence. When they read this sentence aloud to the king, he smiled and repeated it often. The sentence: "There's no such thing as a free lunch." I hope you, patient reader, are just as pleased with this essential wisdom as the king was. And if it seems too simple, well, yes, it is. And yet, there is much wisdom in that sentence. Spiritual leadership axiom 3: wise is as wise does. Action is essential. This is not a book about yoga, at least not in the way most think of it. That said, yoga has been a significant part of my path, and I will share some of its brilliance with you. Perhaps yoga is continuing to blossom so phenomenally because we need help more now than ever. Hundreds of books have been published on moving, aligning your body, and healing through practicing yoga asana, the physical side of yoga. The class is popular in gyms and studios, is only one branch of the tree of a much bigger philosophy or path. I have been practicing yoga for more than 3 decades. At the outset, I was obsessed with the physical side, with the postures. Now, while I still love that part of the practice, I remain focused on the bigger picture of what yoga is. I have come to understand one of the most elegant and useful aspects of yoga. It's a practical philosophy. In other words, it's not enough simply to know something and to understand its components. Yoga is the art and science of putting things together more than taking them apart and analyzing them. Yoga's core aim is to remember the truth of the inherent oneness of life. However, it's not enough to recognize that truth in our heads or even to acknowledge it by saying it out loud. The yoga path requires we apply this vision of unity, that we live it. That's one of the reasons yoga is so popular. It works. In the year 2000, I attended a talk by Eckhart Tolle, who is new on the American spiritual and New Age scene, having just released his first book, The Power of Now. A friend suggested I go, and even though I hadn't read the book yet, I felt drawn to the event. I was new in Seattle, so it took me a while to find the massive church downtown where Tolle was to speak. I sat near the back of the room since the church was already full. Alone and curious, I listened and watched. The church's ceiling towered above us, and the chatter of the buzzing crowd seemed to float in the airy space gently lit through stained glass. Tolle entered stage left and slowly walked to the center, where there was a simple chair, a microphone on a stand, and a small table with a glass of water. He sat humbly in the chair, then slowly turned his gaze from one side of the audience to the other. In the first quiet moments of his entrance had attracted little notice. In the few seconds it took for his head to gradually face each part of the room, the entire audience met him, both in gaze and in silence. I'd never seen a crowd go so quickly from beta state active chattiness to rapt attention, from full speed to zero in 4 seconds flat. Later, when I purchased some of Tolle's talks on audio tape, I noticed the hand-placed sticker on the cover. Stillness is contagious. Jim Rohn, one of my favorite teachers, put it this way: we become the 7 people we hang out with most. Part of what makes retreats and seminars so effective is the group vibration, especially when the teacher is skilled at creating entrainment. The phenomenon where students come into synchrony with each other. Like pendulums in a clock shop, we have the potential for alignment. We are made to merge. Spiritual Leadership Axiom 4. Environment counts. Who we surround ourselves with counts. Wherever you are on your path, and whether you are currently feeling lost in a swamp, emerging on the other side of a fire, or at a crossroads wondering which way to go, I don't think that the guidance in these pages will map your whole journey. The irony is that, in fact, we're already always home. I confidently predict, though, that as you wend your way through this experience, you'll find yourself becoming surer that you were just the right person to be leading the trip. That, in fact, not only are you the only one who can navigate it, but that we're all counting on you. In the words of one of my heroes, whom I'll tell you about later, Ram Dass said, "We're all just walking each other home." All right, y'all. That becomes our pausing point for today. I will be back at the same time next week to continue. Thanks for tuning in. And again, if you got questions, comments, live or by rebroadcast, please drop them in. I would love to hear from you. Love to connect. I hope you're resonating with it. I hope it's fun. I hope it's helpful. I love you lots. Please make your life a masterpiece. See you later. Aloha.